Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another interview on wellness quality management. I'm here with Brent. Welcome, Brent. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Harri. It's great to be here.
As we are discussing the emotional intelligence and the roadmap to achieving that internally within ourselves and in our organization, as you know, the wellness quality management promotes a holistic, integrated way of working from inside and then outside, and then from the organization again to the people. And we're focusing on the people domain of our project management professionalism for our project managers. I'd like to hear your opinion on that and see where we can explore some opportunities for improvement there.
Right. Well, I think it starts with some evaluations and some baselines, and that could be a cultural survey for some baseline stuff. We use an organizational health index that we use sometimes, but then I think it's about evaluating the individuals. And we use the EQI 2.0 to measure emotional intelligence. And the reason we use that is it's based on the Baron EQI, which is the only emotional intelligence instrument that's been scientifically validated. There's other models out there. There's Mesquite, which is an ability-based model. There is the Goleman's model, which is that 4-part model. But the evaluations for those have never been scientifically validated. That's important to us. It may not be important to other folks, but by the way, there's a lot of instruments that are used widely out there that have never been validated, like DISC and Myers-Briggs and some others. And again, if that's important to you, great. If it's not, it's fine, but it's important to us. That's why we chose the EQI 2.0, because I think it gives us some really good material to start from. And also the other thing is none of those others have a 360 version, and the EQI 2.0 does. So if we think we have some validity issues or people aren't giving us, the real answers, can always do a 360 and see what are the viewpoints of others. But then that's the baseline we work from. And we also do a physical survey because we found that some of those behavioral things can be physically caused, from stress or from, if they're not eating properly, not getting sleep, not all those things can cause behavioral issues as well. People can get a little snappy and, not really check in with other people. So we look at both. And I always tell people, if there are behavioral issues that you've got for individuals, and this is important because people don't leave companies, they leave bosses, right? And there's some bad bosses out there, as we all know. We've all had them. But if there are behavioral issues with that boss that's causing people to leave or to be less productive, it'll always show up in their EQI, always. Whether that's a control thing and lack of delegation, or it's the alpha profile, which is really high assertiveness and lower empathy, or if it's a self-sacrifice profile where they have higher empathy and lower assertiveness, that can be just as detrimental from a boss as an alpha. Or we may see anger, frustration, impatience show up in their profile. If they tend to yell a lot or they get angry a lot, that people don't like to be in that work environment. So they end up leaving. So that's the foundation. We look at everybody's individual EQI, and then everybody can work on whatever they need to work on to be a better leader, to contribute better to that culture of human connection and good relationships and good communication and trust and all those things we know create really powerful teams, right?
That's interesting because I'm very familiar with most of the other assessments that you mentioned, and most of them we have these like 100 questions or 200 questions we ask. When you say this is the Baron is scientific, is it also like based on questionnaires and then going on this manual or like a chart?
It's a 133 questionnaire. And you do get a graph. It measures 16 different emotional competencies. So you do get a similar outcome. You get a graph. But here's the other thing I really like about emotional intelligence versus personality. Personality is pretty fixed. And in fact, that's the problem with a lot of those personality tests is the retests. Sometimes they don't get consistent retesting. So that's problematic for an evaluation. So with that lack of scientific rigor in the retesting, it can be very more random, right? So we have the scientifically validated instrument for the EQI 2.0, but also we have the 360 again, which is if we want to really get where we're sure that we're getting the data that we need, but also it can be improved. Like if you get a personality test, you'll say, okay, you're an ENFJ. Okay, yeah, I answered a bunch of questions, and yeah, that's me. I get it. That's pretty accurate. But what do I do with that information, right? Like, do I have everybody that I come into contact with say, here, can you take this test first before we talk? Because then I know how to approach you because I'm an ENFJ and you're an INTJ. But we never have those opportunities to do that. Now, you can do that with a team setting. If you've got a set team, you can learn everybody's personality, and that's okay. And that can be a good exercise. But again, you're not being able to change anything. There's no roadmap to say, if you want to be an INTJ instead of an ENFT, then here's how you do that. It's useless because your personality is pretty fixed. Whereas emotional intelligence, you can change dramatically. You can increase things like self-awareness and empathy. It's not easy, but over time, you can work on those areas. You can make the change. And when you change the fundamental emotional competence, you change behaviors. And when you change behaviors, you change culture.
The way that people treat each other and the way they react to situations is mainly how history is made in organizations. It's like that creates a culture, or vice versa. There's some bad event happen and how your boss came hard on the team and how they kind of threw you under the bus when it was time for accountability and they didn't take responsibility for their part. Like, oh, now I get it. This is how things go in this organization.
Right.
So history makes culture. And as you mentioned, if we have emotional intelligence to understand our behaviors, how we react to things, and how we can promote a healthy, good, positive, what I call quality culture,
Right.
then we can build it over time. And people kind of need time with each other to get that history. But these assessments, like you mentioned, I found it very useful for good leaders that understand how to use the tool in order to bring the good competencies and good behaviors and kind of reward them. So it reinforces it into the organization. How do you guys coach that in your system?
Well, you have to be careful with those baseline evaluations because it sets an expectation that something's going to be done, right? So you got to make sure that the leaders are ready to take some action on if they find some areas where they're not doing well, they need to implement some countermeasures to be able to address those. But that story you told reminded me of that cartoon where the guys are in the boat and the hole's in one end and the guys are bailing and the guys are sitting up on the high end, dry, saying, I'm glad that hole's not in our end of the boat, right? And that's what it reminds me of. And if your other people in your team or other groups or even trade partners are having problems, the first question should be, how can I help you? Not, boy, I'm glad that's not me. I'm glad they're taking all the heat for this. It's how can we help you get through this? That's the culture that's created when you get people sharing their profiles, you get people working on things like empathy or assertiveness or self-awareness, and it creates almost a common language around that. So they'll say in meetings, like after the meeting, boy, you came down pretty hard on that trade partner, maybe a little more empathy, so they start having these discussions, and that's what really starts shifting that culture and creating those high performing teams. Because there's some vulnerability there, and when you have that vulnerability, you create that connection for sure.
Definitely. No, these are great advice, and I really love the way that you're connecting all these topics to each other, and they are interrelated. And I think it came to a realization for me during the pandemic as we lost that connection with each other, because when you're in the office, you see each other, you smile, you talk, you get a coffee together. you kind of build that relation while you're like in close proximity.
Right.
But when you're on Zoom and you're virtual and you're offline, when can you create that? How do you
Yeah.
encourage that in organization?
Well, first of all, not only is it that isolation that we felt during the pandemic, but now that we're going back, there's some anxiety and stress around that. So it's almost like PTSD, right? Oh, man, I've got to interact with people. I'm a really super uber introvert, and now I have to go back to the office or back to the job site trailer. I've got a lot of anxiety around that. So we have to address all of those issues about people coming back and meeting again. And I had the same thing. I had PTSD about travel when I started traveling again and big conferences with 400 or 500 people. It's like, wait a minute, nobody has a mask on. Oh my God. Like, there's this, all this, from the behavior of 2 years of a pandemic, it becomes really anxiety producing. So it's about really naming that and addressing that. And then if you have to do things in a online way with Zoom or Teams or something, I would always have some kind of connection, something with everybody, even if it's just putting them in breakout rooms one-on-one with each other. And the topic is, hey, share something really good that happened with you this week. And so if you get those things first, at least you got a shot at creating those connections. But again, I really believe in that face-to-face live stuff. There's a friend of mine named Chad Pearson, and he talks about positive proximity. It's being in a room together. And there's an energy that's shared. There's a connection that's made that just falls short in a virtual environment. So I would say do that as much as possible. And if people are scared or whatever, make it easy, like meet at a bar or meet at a picnic at a park or coffee somewhere, something easy breezy, where it's a low stress environment, but get people connecting one-on-one as much as possible. And I think we're headed back that direction, but I think we got a long way to go. And companies or people are wanting to work from home more. And then companies are saying, why aren't we paying for all this office space? Could we just eliminate the office? So there's all those things we got to deal with ongoing for sure.
Definitely. Well, it's always nice talking to you, Brent, especially on energy and how things like yoga or like just getting to your fitness and your physiology can help you with your emotional intelligence as well as all this other stuff that we've been talking about. So
I love that discussion, and I'll tell you how it all came about. It was a total accident, but yeah, it's so true. You got to look at the whole person. You can't just look at a piece. True.
Yeah. So we'll continue this thing in our next discussion. Thank you. I appreciate your time. I thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Harri. Bye-bye.
Thank you.